Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today what we're going to discuss is kind of how we use overload and underload implements to kind of train our pitchers, and kind of a little background on it, why they're relevant, how they may be helpful, and kind of what their use looks like. So I think kind of off the bat, kind of first thing to get out of the way is, are overload and underload implements a necessity when training throwers? No, right? They're a tool like anything else. Are dumbbells necessarily when you're lifting in the weight room? Absolutely not. Like there's machines, there's barbells, there's lots of tools that we can use to kind of ultimately get to the destination that we want. But can these over and underload implements help us? Absolutely. So what's the goal when we're using overload and underload implements, right? The ultimate goal is to improve throwing velocity, okay? And I think it's kind of inarguable at this point that that's a really important element when we're talking about kind of pitching quality. So I've discussed in the past how kind of as velocity increases, hitting effectiveness decreases pretty linearly along with those things. All right, so I'm not gonna go over that, it's beyond the scope of this video, but just know that it does. All right, and so what we've seen in the past 15 years is kind of a dramatic increase in average velocity at the major league level, going from 91 to about 94.2 miles an hour last year, okay? And so, it's kind of like an SAT score. Is it the only thing that's gonna get you into college? No. But if you're below a certain level, are you likely to get there? Probably not. So we kind of have to, kind of train towards these things. And overload and underload implements can help us do that, all right? So I think the first important thing to understand when we're talking about throwing velocity is impulse, okay? So impulse is force multiplied by time, okay? And so when we kind of think about this, we have two different ways that we can increase impulse, okay? We can increase the steepness of that curve, that force time curve, so this would be rate of force development, or we can increase kind of the area under that curve in terms of width, all right? So this would be the time element of this. And so I think if we think about this from a throwing standpoint, if we look at somebody kind of from flip up to ball release, that time, that kind of like half ellipsis, is what we're talking about in terms of that time element. And that kind of rate of force development element is how quickly do we move through that? How fast can we apply force? What does it look like relative to our peak force that we're capable of, okay? And so we have two different ways of increasing that, and overload and underload implements can play different roles in terms of that, okay? So a little history on overload and underload implements. So they've been used in other sports well before baseball for decades, okay? So they were prevalent in track and field long before they ever made their way into the baseball world, and basically all of the throwing events, they're still a really important part of that for javelin, discus, shot put. They're relevant in handball, where a lot of our throwing research kind of originates from anyway. And then starting in 1985, Coop Duren and his group did a lot of research on overload and underload implements. Kind of what they found was we see improvements in velocity using kind of either one. And again, their methods were super simplistic, more simplified than what we'd use today, but it just kind of gave us this jumping off point of like, hey, these things do work, we can use these, and then kind of we can dig into how we use those a little bit more today. Okay, so kind of on to the underloads. What do we kind of use these for? So we can, again, kind of steepen that peak when we talk about kind of the force time curve, right, and how quickly we can develop that force. All right, so in guys who tend to muscle up, these can also be really good for helping them feel kind of that crack of the whip, right? They're relax, 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 add tension right at the last second. This can be a really helpful way, because if you tense up too early, what you're gonna see is just guys ripping these into the floor. They're really sensitive to kind of these kind of death grip scenarios that we're gonna see, and we're gonna see just a